Schönen guten Morgen auch von meiner Seite. Mein Name ist Sonja Bettel. Wie Andreas Grisch schon gesagt hat, ich bin Journalistin mit Schwerpunkt Wissenschaftsthemen und auch sehr viele Themen, die sich mit Datensicherheit beschäftigen oder auch eben Geheimdiensten zum Beispiel für heuer. Ich wechsle jetzt auf Englisch, weil ein Teil unserer Gäste hier am Podium nicht Deutsch spricht oder nicht in der Diskussion Deutsch sprechen möchte. Welcome our guests, welcome you in this hall. We will, at the beginning of this year's Datennetz-Politik conference, we would like to discuss the role of data protection authorities against the background of surveillance by secret services. Our experts here on the panel are in the fields of data protection, human rights, technology and security. And we would like to debate about strategies for trustworthy internet communication and which role data protection authorities can play in the role of control of secret services, which role they can play in the control of secret services. First of all, I would like to introduce our podium, Natasha Pirc-Musa. She's coming from Slovenia. She has been Commissioner for Freedom of Information and Data Protection in Slovenia for 10 years. In this position, she was accountable only to the Constitutional Court, and she was elected by the Parliament, and she will tell us a little bit about this function and the role when it comes to secret services as well. She studied law, and she has worked as a television journalist, which is as well quite interesting because, of course, journalists play a special role or are a special target for secret services. Mario Oetheimer, he is working at the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights. He is their head of the sector Information Society, Privacy and Data Protection. And he coordinates exchanges between the agency and the Council of Europe. He as well studied law and previously worked for the Council of Europe for 13 years. He has authored several publications, and his special expertise is on freedom of expression and the European Court of Human Rights. Gerd Polly, he's the founder of the company Polly Intelligence and Public Safety. This company provides political and economic intelligence, cyber intelligence, IT security, and protection of assets and personnel. He was appointed head of the Austrian Civil Intelligence Service, the German Bundesamt für Verfassungsschutz und Terrorismusbekämpfung, until 2008. And he was responsible for corporate security in the commercial sector as well, in companies like Siemens, for example. And prior to this, Gerd Polly spent 25 years as a serving officer in the Austrian Armed Forces, much of it in the Foreign Intelligence Service. So he knows what we all only know from some books and articles and so on. So he knows it in detail. Christoph Johl, he is scientific director of the Research Institute Center for Digital Human Rights in Vienna. He as well studied law and communications engineering, so that means he knows a lot about the technical details. And for many years he has been researcher at the Ludwig Boltzmann Institut für Menschenrechte, the Institute for Human Rights, and he's still in close contact, as far as I heard. He's as well famous, I think, here as a leading member of the AK Vorrat, the working group on data retention, and he acted as a first plaintiff in the constitutional complaint against data retention in Austria. And his main field of research is the role of human and fundamental rights in the context of the information society. So I think we can welcome our panel here. So please, for some applause. Thank you. I'm sorry, I think I'm making too much noise with the microphone. Is it okay? Okay, I try not to. Okay, so first we have a thesis. You know, we all know, I think, a lot about the electronic mass interception of citizens by intelligence services. And our thesis is it's quite easy, not only because the NSA, GCHQ, and probably others have a lot of money and a lot of personnel, but also because many firms and services who deal with a lot of our data and data of companies or provide communication tools do not deploy data protection on a technical and organizational and structural level in the necessary way. And this, on the other hand, is of course possible because of the legal framework and because, like, for example, the Data Protection Authority in Austria does not have enough personnel and money to do its job properly. It's always telling this every year in its report. And this, of course, is a political issue. So I would like to ask our panelists, how is the actual situation? And then what could we do, and would it help at all? So first of all, maybe I ask Natasha Pirc-Musa. I think the situation in Slovenia is special because you as well had an oversight over the secret services, but what were your possibilities in the field of data protection control?
Hello, thank you for inviting me here to Vienna. I love Vienna. Well, you asked a couple of questions which are million-dollar questions. To answer what can we do and in any way will it work what we suggest, this is a tug of war between the big guys and the people who do not like surveillance society. But let me answer firstly the last question you asked. So what is the situation currently in Slovenia? I have to tell you that Slovenia is one of the few countries, basically there are only 2 countries in the European Union where information commissioners, data protection authorities have the competence to supervise intelligence agency as well. So every 2 years I performed an inspection in Slovenian intelligence agency, so I basically know tiny little details what the Slovenian intelligence agency is doing. I really have to be careful what I'm allowed to tell. So the situation, even in my country, is not legally perfect. For the last 8 years, I am constantly explaining to the Slovenian government and to the parliament that Slovenian intelligence agency law is unconstitutional. I will just tell you one tiny little bit of a detail what I'm talking about. So in Slovenian law, and Slovenian constitution is one of the toughest constitutions in the European Union, where you can invade communication privacy only if you have a court order. Not many countries in Europe, only 4 countries in the European Union have such a strict rule that communication privacy can be invaded if you have a legal ground and if you have a court order. So both conditions have to be fulfilled. Slovenian intelligence agency law is saying that for the international wires, you do not need a court order. And this is where all the muddy waters, all the tricks are played within the 007s and other spies in all intelligence agencies. So what's basically the point that the spies are doing in this field? If, for example, I am in the focus of Slovenian intelligence agency and they do not, and they do know that they do not have enough proofs to persuade the judge to approve the wiretapping of all of my communication on Slovenian ground, they say, okay, we do not have enough proof, Slovenian judges are not going to approve to wiretape Natasha. Let's go to Austrian colleagues and say, please get the information on the international wires and then through bilateral agreement, send the information to Slovenia, and here it is. The constitutional violation, no court order. The Austrian colleagues are more than happy to help the Slovenian colleagues, and vice versa is also happening. So this is what the intelligence agencies all around the world are basically doing. Bilateral agreements are the agreements that the public is not aware of. And I am telling this to Slovenian governments for 8 years, as I said already. No success. Nobody wants to, deal with that. I was patient for 8 years. I didn't go in a campaign and advocating what the intelligence agency in Slovenia is doing, because I wanted to be fair as the information commissioner and say, please, this is my job. I have to supervise the intelligence guys, and I'm telling you what's wrong. Let's do some corrections. I filed a constitutional review on Slovenian Constitutional Court. They didn't want to decide on that. They just overruled my constitutional demand on some procedural grounds. And this is what I'm basically afraid of, you know. The NSA is doing the same stuff. Even Slovenian colleagues would do a mass surveillance if they had the money and if they had the equipment. So I'm lucky that Slovenia is not a rich country, but otherwise the Slovenian intelligence agency would do completely the same as the NSA. What's the advantage of the NSA? They have access to so-called transatlantic cables where 98% of all the internet traffic can be under surveillance. So this is what we're discussing today. The bilateral agreements and the cooperation between intelligence agency, which is totally out of the supervision. And now the question, what can we do? I strongly believe that in the world that we live today, a strong supranational supervisory body needs to be established, because local data protection authorities cannot oversee what the exchange between Austria and Slovenia is all about. This is out of our hands. And if we say that supranational supervision is not necessary, that's hypocrisy. It is necessary. There is no other way to start checking what the world is doing, what the world's intelligence agencies are doing in that field. So despite the fact, just to conclude, that I did have the power, my mandate was just over a couple of months ago, that I had the power to supervise the intelligence agency, there was not much I could do. Firstly, the law is unconstitutional. Nobody wants to make an addition of it. And the government and the intelligence agencies are not in the position to tell me what's going on grounds of bilateral agreements. So this is my pain. This is my frustration, if you want me to say so. And I feel that me alone, or with a couple of my colleagues at the Information Commissioner's Office, are just not simply enough to make a push. So we need an international movement on that ground. If we, the people, can, gather the power, maybe we can move mountains, that's what we say in Slovenia. But if we are going to be just simply quiet, there is nothing that we will change. And maybe just one sentence, one very, very strong sentence, my Russian colleague Ivan Pavlov once said. I often repeat that sentence in my head. Human rights are like muscles. If you do not use them, they will atrophy. So we have to scream and shout about the wrongdoings in the world.
Thank you very much. Mario Oetheimer, you know more about the situation in the European Union in general, how the data protection authorities are equipped, so to say, and how the legal situation gives them the possibilities to do some control or not. Maybe you can take the microphone, please.
Thank you very much, Sonia, and thank you for the organizer for inviting me. It's a great honor to be able to address this audience today. Can I just take a step back? Because of course, Natasha just started full power, as he usually is, with pointing to really the core of the issue. But I'd like just to take a few seconds, a step back to explain a bit what we have found at the Fundamental Rights Agency on the situation of and the role of the data protection authorities in the EU member states. First, for those of you who don't know the Fundamental Rights Agency, it happens to be in Vienna, so it's the first time that I didn't have to travel for a conference also. I'm very pleased about that. And we are basically advising EU institutions and member states on what I was very attracted to, that is not only providing an overview of the situation, on the legal situation in the member states on a given situation, but also check what's happening on the ground. And for those of you who are interested, and if you grab a copy of the Access to Data Protection Remedy report that is outside the hall, you'll see that we have actually interviewed individuals to see, in a case of data protection violation, what are you doing? To whom are you turning to? Have you found enough support in your claims? Basically, the findings are very simple, and I can summarize them in three key topics. First, generally, there is a total lack of awareness, or a general lack of awareness of the concept of even privacy or data protection among the people that we've interviewed. So a vague sense. But here I believe, and I'm an optimist, I think Edward Snowden helped us a lot to bring the case for privacy and data protection. Sadly, it was hitting the media for a while at least. And generally speaking, even if you look at Eurobarometer surveys, you realize that people, even they might not know what is the concept of data protection, they have a sense that their data, they want to keep their data private and secured in their communication, in their bank exchange, and all that. So I think we shouldn't be too negative about this, while of course we all wish that human rights activists, population as a whole, gather on the street and fight. I'm really all for that as well. The reality is that in the private home, I believe that there is a general understanding of that. So that's hopeful. But still, we have a problem of awareness. And here, that's clearly the first role of data protection authorities, among others, to raise this awareness. And I know that some of them in the European member states do a lot of work in awareness-raising processes. We contributed to this by publishing a little handbook on data protection that will be translated in all the EU member states' languages. But this is only, of course, a drop in the ocean. Now, that's the first key point. The second point is that an individual who has a vague sense of what is privacy and felt that his data protection was violated would turn to a data protection authority. It's a logical route that an individual would take. Why? Because usually they are cheap, free, most of the time, easily accessible, and close to his or her home. So this is something also which is very important. Courts, in this case, are remote, expensive, and long. So therefore, the individual will not fight necessarily for his privacy, his or her privacy in court. The problem is, and we can speak maybe later about the situation of data protection authorities in the EU member states at length if you wish. The problem is that most of the time we encounter issues of funding, staff questions, and also expertise. We're talking about highly complicated systems here that lawyers alone cannot deal with. And therefore, in some of the data protection authorities, you have a good, strong team of computer experts, for example, that will help and translate the issues into a data protection way, which is very helpful for the data protection authority. Third, we're lacking a lot of individual lack support. Like in other fields, in fact, the Fundamental Rights Agency looks also at matters of discrimination, for example. We look at various fields, and in many, many cases, an individual left alone would turn to an NGO, would like to have an NGO helping him or her to file a suit in a correct way, to address a data protection authority in a correct way. Well, here again in Austria, we're lucky. I mean, we have good NGOs. We have, of course, Max Schrems, for example, who hit the media as well. This is very useful. But the reality is that in most European countries, you have no specialized NGOs that could actually support this. Now, to answer your question, more in detail linked to surveillance. We are currently carrying a project upon the request of the European Parliament on what is the situation of the individual in cases of large-scale surveillance. What can they do, to whom they can turn to? So, I mean, I don't have the answers now. We're literally analyzing the data that we have. But again, next year we will try to go into member states, to talk to people, to talk to intelligence services, to talk to oversight body in parliament, to talk to data protection authority, to talk to NGOs, to try to see what can they all do in order to help an individual to protect his or her data protection rights. At this stage, as Natasha just said, there are only a few data protection authorities that have a very large competence, let's say. In a majority of countries, the data protection authority would have some sort of competence, and that's a majority of countries, so, which is already a good sign. The problem is very often is that the competence in area of national security is very often limited through procedural, for procedural reasons. For example, while normally a data protection authority would have a full access, like Natasha just said, to the file, in many countries you would have only a limited access. And the intelligence service would have the ability to decide, well, no, sorry, you can access that, but you cannot access this. And therefore, to conduct a proper analysis of a data protection safeguard by an intelligence service, it's almost meaningless. Other cases are, well, if you want to analyze this situation, we don't want the staff member to come, we want your chair. You want your head of the commission to come. Oh, of course, you know, you're taking the highest person, the busiest person in the field, so that he or her will be, of course, very limited in his capacity or her capacity to actually attend and do a proper control. So those are the issues that we're faced with, and I'm not even talking about transatlantic or even within EU cooperation between intelligence services, because I fully agree with Natasha, this is one of the core problems that we're faced with. But already at national level, we see that the data protection authorities' competences are sometimes limited for all sorts of reasons, but already in law. Now the problem is, I believe, that once we have found that out, we need to see within the legislation, which is extremely diverse at EU level, since it's not since EU competence is very limited in the field of national security, to say the least, so there is very little harmonization from that point of view. You need to see what are the constitutional tradition in a country, what are the systems that have been put in place in order to entice a data protection authority who might be limited in its competence to cooperate with oversight bodies. And this is, I think, something, a concrete, very concrete proposal that needs to be implemented. Make sure that there are cooperation routes, that there are communication routes between a data protection authority and an oversight body, being in parliament or a specialized expert body overseeing the work of the intelligence service. Make sure that there is a dialogue, that there are communication, that there are agreements even. And this has happened since the Snowden revelation. For example, in Italy you would have a memorandum of understanding having been drafted and agreed upon between the two institutions. And that's already going in the right direction. I mean, those are little steps, I fully agree, but still they show that they are important. Another example would be, for example, in a little country like Luxembourg, where you have a data protection authority who is totally incompetent to deal with this area. Two of their members sit on the oversight specialized expert body of the intelligence service. Those links and bridges are, I think, very, very useful.
Thank you. Christoph Scholl, when we look at technology and organizational backgrounds, where, so to say, are our data lost? I mean, is it, so to find out, is it really a problem of data protection and the control of data protection? So are the secret services using holes in systems or the way technology is designed to get the data?
Well, Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate very much also to contribute here. I can really identify with everything what we heard so far, and I think it's both. We're coming from both sides. We have first of all a lack in the conception of our normative framework beyond this, what means data protection. And there, particularly in Europe, we have to be careful, because on one side, we have an internationally recognized very strong normative framework for data protection and principles. On the other side, we have some parts where we have more holes than we have cheese. But it is so much by let's say, a kind of carpet of bits and pieces, intransparent to some extent where are these limits, and this is from the side of the normative framework. I don't want to go into too much details, but for example, this question of domestic and international intelligence cooperation and police cooperation. We have, for example, framework where a lot of people are not aware, for example, in Europol, where actually one has to consider Europol is not really an operative body, it is more strategic work, but it starts to take more and more international operative tasks. So there we have, for example, a framework decision on data protection, which looks quite strong. When you see it, you would even consider it as a good practice model and everything. But one has to know now that these rules are limited to exactly the channels provided by Europol, which is very narrowly, which is not really actually the interesting data exchange what we're talking about. This is rather a kind of also a framework of providing contacts and so on, whereas the real interesting information, really that personal related data for investigation and intelligence measures is exchanged on bilateral channels which are going on the side of this. So now the legal framework, including strong principles, including a joint supervisory bodies, how Natasha said, of all data protection authorities within European Union. And all this is just working and applicable on that part, which is actually not really interesting, and as soon as it comes to the data really interesting, to the personal data, they use bilateral channels. The domestic laws is in general not applicable due to a lot of exceptions. As far as I see, almost every national transposition of data protection law does allow, because already the directive of data protection allows for such exceptions as soon as we are in secrecy of states, as soon as we are in investigation and criminal matters. So there we have a lack. There we have some approaches now with a suggested data protection directive in the field of police communication, which does something remarkable. It says at least the principles have to be applicable also on mere domestic level. And all that means that includes everything. That would include even the bilateral cooperation. Let's see how this could turn out. But we have to repair these lacks in the normative framework and in the control from one side. But from the other side, we come now from, let's say, a technical side and a huge cross-cutting with responsibility of private companies, of those of technology vendors and services, technological services, where we can, for mid-term and for long-term approaches, not say this will be all about just the legal framework and data protection authorities. Is a very important part, but we will not be able to handle all the problems if we do not find a systematic where we can really and effectively claim the responsibility also of private players. What means, to what extent does our human right to data protection bind actually private players? Where do we leave, let's say, the thin line between compliance, what a company has to do, and where we come to the corporate social responsibility with its elements, respect, protect, remedy, according to the Ruggie framework from the United Nations there. So we have to deal here with company from a very European point of view also, where we have to ask what is, for example, also their supply chain, where we're coming into lags. If you use particular technology, I don't want to do now too much US bashing, because I think Europe has itself also enough responsibility and to do there. But of course we see now, since Snowden stronger, that particularly Silicon Valley companies are more involved, that we don't know, to some parts we know, to some parts we don't. Where are weak spots in our technology? If a huge company like Cisco Systems have implemented some backdoors somewhere in their routers, which every company is needing, we will not really achieve in the end with whatever system really to secure these systems. And there is the problem, that we have this Janus head, that we have threats in terms of cybercrime also, which completely overlap with investigation for particularly secret intelligence measures also. You have a virus, something what you, for example, would easily consider as a cybercrime attack, by backdoor viruses, by compromising certification authorities, whatever, which is exposed to cybercrime investigations. If you see the same thing, for example, Stuxnet, the virus, which is very likely to be produced by the National Security Agency, we have the same thing. On one side it would be a crime, on the other side, if intelligence say no, we also don't have a legal base, but this is of course everything legally. The same threat, and if we don't understand the things and how they are going together there, we will not be able to deal with the problems in future.
Thank you very much. Gerd Polly, you know several sides of the story, I think. When we look at the story that has been in the German magazine Der Spiegel this week about revelations of Snowden, that the NSA and GCHQ have built the so-called, or working on the so-called treasure map, where they try to map all connections and devices and so on that are on the internet and that could be intercepted. And then the Spiegel reporters went to some of the German companies that have been the targets. And for example, the company Stellar in Köln, I think, as far as I remember, or other companies like NetCologne, they, even after seeing what the NSA had, what kind of information they had, they were looking into their servers and so on, and they couldn't find the holes. Maybe they were not there anymore, but I think when it comes to technology, is it possible at all to fight against these attacks? Because you have been working for intelligence, and now you're working for companies to try to protect them. Are you able to protect them against these kind of things? Is it technologically possible? Okay, we have a question. Do you want to talk German or English? I don't know if Natasha understands German. Not so good. Okay.
So let's speak in English. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Feel like Tom Hanks in his film. What was the name? Forrest Gump. When he finds himself in Washington D.C. in a peace movement doing a speech. So this is the way I feel, because I was more than 30 years on the other side, to call that, and started in the military foreign intelligence service, then the civil service, and was almost the head for 8 years in Austria for this civil service. Have to say, to summarize all this time, data protection was never ever on my table for 30 years. The questions we brought up here are so wide. I would like to start with your question, basically, because I understand now both sides, the sides of the authority, the intelligence service and the police and the military, but I also have some ideas how company feels. May I come back to Austria, bring your question to a national level? We might all remember, for not very long, there was this rumor that Austria might be a center of espionage for NSA, together with 10 other countries. It came up in 2011, I think so, and it was claimed that the entire communication is from 11 countries plus is stored by the NSA, which gives the analyst an incredible possibility of access to data. Austria has recently made a court case out of this, and the Bundesamt für Verfassungsschutz, the authority which I had the pleasure being the head of, started an investigation. And it was not a surprise. They could not find anything. Not because they had a political they were politically shut down. No, they could not find anything. This is the same case and refers to your question. Are companies or authorities in Europe technically available to find out what's going on? And the answer is very simple, no, they can't. Because the technical gap between the NSA and the US resources and Austria and European services, including police, but excluding, of course, the British partner, is so wide it never could be close. So, first. Second, we are talking about intelligence services and their abilities. Latest, with the revelation of Mr. Snowden, it puts a totally different picture to services. NSA doesn't need to care because NSA owns all this data. In former times, there is this cooperation which was referred to several times. You ask the Slovenian service about data and they will come up with some data you cannot get in Austria. This is not necessary anymore. This is not necessary anymore. 10 years ago, the cooperation with NSA or CIA was the way that if an Austrian or another national in Europe is involved, they came and asked for information. They do not anymore. It is vice versa. If you have information you have no access to, you ask the Americans or other services to provide information. And this is a very, from the point of service, valuable channel. To sum this up, this question, yes, the technology gap is so wide that even those authorities who were targeted for espionage things in Germany, in Austria, even in France, are not able even to find a trace that there was a data breach or something else. And we have not yet talked about what services are doing with this information. And then intelligence services, stories and operations starts. This is the starting point, not the end.
This sounds like a very frustrating answer, I have to say. But I'm an optimistic person and I ask you all, what can we do? I think at least what made us, society, quite angry is that it's always said transparency is not possible because this is national security and we cannot tell you this, we cannot give you that, we cannot even tell the people of the parliament things and so on. So maybe Mario Oetheimer is, because I read this in this paper of the working group, is it first of all at least necessary to change the law or change how we deal with these topics and say we, the people, are now demanding more information about the work of the secret services?
You will not be surprised by a lawyer to say, yes, of course, we need to change the law. But I do believe in this, seriously, and the discussion that are taking place now in actually reforming the data protection law at EU level need to be speed up and to come to a close. I mean, it will not solve every issue, but at least, that's why I started discussing about the situation of data protection authorities. They have very little, but extremely important improvement in the draft regulation for the data protection authorities. It would provide them with a sanctioning power that they don't currently have most of the time, or a level of sanction that would be very important. Now, of course, it will not change the situation in the area of national securities, but it would provide at least them with the necessary tools to implement data protection rules, which in fact might then have an impact in other fields. You don't know that. Give the power already in a general data protection area, and then this power can eventually be used, if so decided, by the legislator. Now, I would really emphasize again the need to see this issue as a whole, and you need to play with all the players. You can't put all your money on the data protection authorities. They have a role to play, but their role is still very second and limited in most of the cases. Therefore, you need to strengthen the other bodies that are playing. Look at the situation as oversight body. You were referring to a parliament and members of parliaments that would not have access to data. Why is it so? I'm sorry, if you really are serious about democratic accountability, where will you seek this democratic accountability if not in Parliament? So you need to push this as well, so that these members, who are busy people after all, and therefore should not be left alone either, but you improve the situation of Data Protection Authority, you improve the situation of oversight body in Parliament, and then I believe, at least from what I sense at this stage in our analysis, that expert bodies, specialized body, the people who have the trust of the intelligence services because they know, could also play an interesting role in this partnership. Now, to come back to the transparency, I think people do not need to know everything what's happening. There are, of course, very important things at stake, and I think, reasonably speaking, there are information that do not need to go into the public sphere. However, if I were told, well, look at the situation we have a very strong oversight body, well-funded, well-staffed. We have a very strong parliamentary committee that that receives regular reports from the intelligence service and that can actually question these people on a regular basis, even in camera, if you want, in camera sessions. And we have a data protection authority that provides the necessary knowledge so that one day will hear about data protection. If I were told this, I believe I'd be quite happy about the level of transparency. I would be much more, let's say, at ease with what intelligence service would do, because I would know at least the processes that are in place. So this would be, I think, for me, already a very big step forward, and the law needs to be changed for that, certainly.
Maybe Natasha, any ideas what we could do?
I'm definitely not a person who would give up so easily, so I'm always thinking about how to do and what to do to change the world. To give more powers to data protection authorities, that's for sure the first step we can take. Slovenian Information Commissioner has a lot of powers. We are one of the strongest commissioners in the world, basically. And because of the powers that we have, there is a lot of fuss on the political side that they want to take the powers away. But I was strong enough for those last 10 years not to let them to take my powers away, the power of the Information Commissioner's office. So why do I think that we need stronger powers? We can never find all wrongdoings in the data protection world, never. But as you said, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of your colleagues think the same way, that for the last 30 years, personal data protection was not on your agenda. You were not aware of it, not just only aware of it, but you didn't want to think about it. But if we do have strong powers, we make them think about data protection. And one strong power that we have, guys, if we catch you, it will hurt. This is what those guys at the intelligence agencies and the police They have to constantly think about. What's one of the most important things that we have to do in the future? This is what I strongly believe in as well. We have to persuade the governments of the world that the methods the intelligence agencies are using cannot be secret data. I do not have anything against that if the secret agency, intelligence agency, is surveilling Natasha, Christoph, you, Sonia, this is a secret data because this is what the public is not allowed to know, who is under surveillance. But what kind of methods intelligence agencies are using, this is what the public has the right to know. We have to discuss whether the methods are necessary in democratic society, if I use the wording from the European Convention on Human Rights, and if there are proportionate. Proportionality principle is a strong legal tool to discuss the necessity, and from the necessity, the methods of the intelligence agencies. Transparency International did a document on that. It's called the Tshwane Principles. Tshwane is one city in South Africa, and the document is called by the town where this document was enacted. And this is what this document is talking about. So methods are not to be secret data. And just to make a comparison between the police and intelligence agencies, they basically do the same work, basically. And for the intelligence agencies, we basically know nothing what they do, but for the police, they are heavily under surveillance, under supervision, and they are heavily under the so-called legality rule. They have to have a legal ground for everything they do because their invasion into human rights is powerful and strong. That's why they need limits. And I'm pretty sure that you do remember what happened in Germany when the Germans found out about the Trojan horses that the police was able to implement randomly into the computers of the citizens of Germany. And German Constitutional Court said, no, sorry guys, you cannot do that randomly, you're not allowed to do that. You need to have a ground to put a Trojan horse, which is a strong virus, to somebody's computer. For example, in Slovenia, the police was not really happy with my work, but when they wanted to enact IMSI catchers and drones into a criminal procedure act, I told them, no, if there are no strong corrective tools on who's going to supervise them and who's going to authorize the use of an IMSI catcher or a drone or a Trojan horse. So those technical gadgets, technical tools, are to be heavily legalized. They have to be enacted in the law, and the way those IT tools can be used have to be heavily processed, heavily legalized as well. And I do not see a difference in that field by the regular police and the intelligence agencies. They use the same tools, but for the police, we know what they have and we know how those tools can be used. For the intelligence agency, we do not have a clue what kind of gadgets they have and how they use them. And this is the difference. This is the paradigm that it needs to be shifted and changed.
That's a good topic for a question in between to get Polly, because you have been responsible for the reorganization of the Austrian Staatspolizei into the Bundesamt für Verfassungsschutz, I have to say, because I'm always confusing it with the German name of it. As far as I remember, there was a sort of a scandal about the Staatspolizei because there was no control and they collected at that time with other means, of course, but they collected a lot of data about the people and nobody knew what are they doing. And I think there have been some changes when it comes to control as well and to the organization. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yes, this story goes back to the year 2000, 2001, 2002. This might come by a surprise for you, but we do not have an intelligence service in Austria, as they do have in Germany or as they do have in Slovenia or elsewhere. The so-called service in Austria is purely police, means the competences of the Bundesamt für Verfassungsschutz, and an ordinary policeman on the street which asks for your driver license is basically the same. It's basically the same. The reason why we were not able at that time under this government in the year 2000 to establish an intelligence service was the parliament, or several parts of the parliament, were not willing to build up an organization which works before the police even get a clue of this case, so in the preventive case. And we do currently not have a law for this. But another organization was trying to get these competences since the year 2000. It was the military. The same organization which I came from is the HNA. If you follow the law for the HNA, or the so-called Militärbefugnisgesetz, you will see that this organization is on the way to get a service without substantial control. And there was constantly a struggle between the so-called military service, which was not a service, and the Bundesamt für Verfassungsschutz. And this is going on. What you realize now is the reorganization of the Bundesamt für Verfassungsschutz und Terrorismusbekämpfung, which means they politically try next time to differentiate themselves from the ordinary police and from the law, which is basically the macho law on one side and the Sicherheitspolizeigesetz on the other side, to get a very special status. And this is the way to change a police service to an intelligence service.
Christoph, still the question, what can we do?
Well, I want to approach this from the two sides mainly, what we already discussed. First of all, what is the role of civil society? And I want to combine it with the question, what does the law on the other side means in a democratic society? From experience, when Andreas, Krish and me started, it's about 5 years ago now at this time, at one very crucial meeting with Doris Liebwald, who is unfortunately not here today, at the day where we took the decision to found AK Vorrat as a roof organization of more civil society organizations working on that topic. We were in a situation where we had the frequent experience that media told us, not the Eins, yeah, but most of media told us, data retention, that is too complex, that is not sexy, that doesn't sell, we cannot really bring stories, nobody does understand, that's much too complex, and how shall we sell this to people, we don't gather interests. And we said, that is not true, that is underestimating the capacity of people to understand their role and how society is working. Even most of the people, of course, might not understand in every detail what kind of data and what is the technical and legal restraints, but what is going on in general and how they are touched is understandable. And there we kept believing, and we showed 1 year later, or about 2 years later, we had a petition which was supported by 106,000 people against data retention. We had another year later, we had more than 11,000 people that signed us, that assigned us, as AK Vorrat and our lawyer, to bring this mass complaint against data retention. Well, of course, I was mainly writing that complaint. I could have done that as a single person. But what do you think? The motivation of the European Court of Justice and then later the Austrian Constitutional Court would have been the same if a complaint coming from 11,000 people or a complaint coming from one paranoid guy. Well, there it starts already, and that is a very basic element which does start on one side in a circle of responsibility of more players, of interest groups, of NGOs, but also of media and so on. And of course, individual responsibility to take a little bit care what is going on in our society. And then coming, of course, the question of law. and transparency. Do we have laws because somewhere in some lobbyist groups and somewhere we do some law which suddenly happen to be here and then we have to be compliant? Or is law something as an expression of the general approach of a society by democratic means? I think there is a very crucial part where we can do a lot, where we're in the middle of doing something and where we can do further things for putting up some pressure to policymakers, to lawmakers. And particularly in human rights, the European Court of Human Rights said in the case of Tyrer in 1964, the convention is a living instrument which has to be interpreted by in the light of daily, of present day's conditions. So we are there, right, exactly in this. Don't underestimate I would say, the wisdom of the crowd also when it comes to technological means. Look, for example, at PGP, pretty good privacy. One standard which we all know what we use, what a lot of us, I think even in this room, use for encrypting their personal, their private communication by email. This is a standard that is developed on the base of open source. That means a high security standard which is due to that reachable because the source code is open, because it is not so easy to find some leaks within the construction of the standard itself. Yeah? Even how it started, they had to smuggle it out, printed on a t-shirt out of US in order to be allowed to bring the PGP source code and system legally into Europe. That shows already from the history where we are there. So now, also to conclude and to come back on the other side of our thing, technical developments. I think we are at the moment right in front of a quite good window of opportunity where we are not just approaching these things as civil societies, as citizens, as like the power what we have as private persons, but we are starting to meet more and more visible and aware the interest of industries and business. Because we are talking now more and more of so-called cyber threats to critical infrastructure. With increasing inclusion of information and communication, telecommunication in production processes, so-called smart production, or Industry 4.0 is in German the term for it. When we see that we're going more and more to concepts of smart cities, smart homes, where ICT is involved on all levels, and also of all levels of the how you said it, Wertschöpfungskette, of the chain, of the business developing chain, we see that there is a huge interest for gathering a real and reliable potential for security measures in technical terms and in organizational terms, because we see there is our energy supply, our energy companies, our banks, everybody is now doing online banking. All of this is hanging there, and with large-scale attacks also on neuralgic points like certification authorities and this, we can easily come very fast in a scenario of not just an urgent case, but a catastrophe for all the countries. So what we have suddenly now, and it's not so suddenly, but more and more, is that we have business cases to the very same topic, to the very same technology, what we can use. That there is interest from private business side to do something there. So what we should achieve now is to use this window of opportunity, and that there are business cases where companies are willing even to take money for developing new concepts, new approaches, privacy enhancing technologies and information security technologies, that we use this hype, that we don't get lost as a society and say what is coming up there, we want to use as well in terms of society privacy enhancing. And when we are able to use that now, I think there is quite a good chance also to build European solutions. Like, I'm finished now almost. Remember the Airbus, the discussion of Airbus, making a European system of developing big let's say planes and big flight possibilities, not to depend too much just on one society. A little bit like this we have, for example, now if we think about cloud computing. Yeah? Something like the Airbus in the cloud. Yeah? Something where we say a European cloud with European standard, not anymore depending on Silicon Valley actors where we have not so much. This could be an approach, and I think there is quite a lot which we can approach from different sides. So I'm still quite optimistic, even if it doesn't look so nice at the moment.
Just to add something what Christoph said, I'm often really very happy when I find articles on the internet which are discussing how to fight against surveillance. Yeah? And every action of the state, every action of intelligence agencies is causing a reaction of a common people. For example, one guy in the United States of America is developing a so-called droneless city. A city where the drones will not be able to use the cameras and invade your privacy. Textile industry is, for example, developing clothes which are disabling face recognition. So this is what is really, interesting from the other point of view. And one more thing, which is also really, really very important. Everything, all the surveillance of the NSA is now going on in the internet. We still do not have a global law of the internet today. This is something where the lawyers will have to do something to regulate this cyberspace. For example, Law of the Sea was drafted for 25 years by the best sea lawyers in the world. We do have a Law of the Sea today. When we gained access to the internet in 1995, when the internet was given to a general public, from 1995 until today, we are discussing how to draft a global law of the net. We are still at the point zero. We do not have a global law of the net, and because of that fact, the intelligence agencies are using this open sea of the internet, and the bad guys are using this in the dark net and some, cybercrime methods which are going on in the internet. So this is what we have to discuss also in the future. Bearing in mind, I will tell you one more strong sentence, that invasion into communication privacy and heavy regulation of the internet is a threat for the freedom of expression as well. How to strike the right balance between those opposing rights is a very tough legal question.
Thank you very much, Natasha. We have exactly 10 more minutes until the next talk. Are there any questions? Because Christoph Scholl talked about the wisdom of the crowd. Any questions or ideas? I'm not sure if we have a microphone for the audience extra, or I can borrow mine. Are there any urgent questions or ideas? Otherwise, I think there are enough breaks to talk about this, and some of our panelists, I think, will stay here for later talks. Okay, so any more ideas about what to do?
I have a question for Natasha, please. Because I'd like to understand how you would see the international oversight body that you mentioned. In which context you would see it functioning? Because I came to the same conclusion. I fully share the findings and the solution in a theoretical way. But I'd like to understand how, if you have thought of which forum would be the appropriate forum that would enable the setting up of this international oversight body, oversight, let's call it that way, that you were mentioning before.
Legally speaking, there is only one possibility, and you know it, it's United Nations. There is no other organization which can enact and draft the supranational binding regulations to make the possible oversight of the intelligence agencies. But United States of America have a veto there. So again, we are facing the wall which seems unbreakable. In the European Union, we do have a chance to draft a regulation or something which is binding for all 28 member states. Within the Council of Europe, we can probably do something. But to cover all 194 members of the United Nations, we have to have a debate there as well. Even there are only 194 countries, and we do have 205 countries in the world. Not all the countries are members of the United Nations, so we still have holes. As long as we do not cover the whole world, there will be one Vanuatu, Eritrea, Kiribati, East Timor, where there is going to be a possibility to flow and fly and swim outside of the international SAPRA regulation. So there's a lot to do in the world still for the people like you and me and maybe people in the audience as well.
It is already interesting. Is it working? Yeah. It is already interesting to that question what we saw in the last decade on development. Think about ICANN. Yeah? Internet governance body, so somehow. We saw the development there that previously these tasks were mainly and even more clearly almost allocated to a huge US responsibility there. So for whatever reasons, even US somehow agreed that it would be better to have at least a little bit more democratization in this problem, and then ICANN was constructed how it is now with some, and that is not a pleasure yet that ICANN now is perfectly running, but it is better. It is better, we have some inclusion there of people, of science and so on. That can be a start. I think that I completely agree, United Nations is the point. We have now, for example, from United Nations Human Rights Council, a declaration of 2012 where they said every human right coming from the offline world is also applicable online. It's a clear declaration. Yeah? That is a good starting point, and there we have one common level, except a few countries, not even in United Nations, where we basically agree. I think the claim or the hope to have someone really a body, an international body worldwide with really competent authority competences and so on is very nice. I think it is already a good start when we have common declarations of understandings. We see even in much closer connections and within Europe or neighbor countries of Europe that there is, you said the term of the so-called darknet. In cybercrime investigation, I'm doing even teaching to law enforcement in Europe to cybercrime investigation unit. Just the term of darknet is so misunderstanding because technically speaking is first of all nothing more than some kind of virtual private network where I do not allow anybody from outside to enter my purpose. So when does the darknet getting darknet? Yeah? What does it mean? I was working last year quite a lot in Turkey, in the middle between telecom industries and law enforcement there. In Turkey, you have a general prohibition of online betting. In Europe, it is not prohibited. You have legal services for online betting. Yeah? So in one moment, you just cross the border, you step with your notebook with the very same application open over that border, and what you just did legally is now illegally. And if you do it in a private network, your private network gets a darknet. So just to have a common understanding of what the terms mean, of what are we actually doing and how we take the balance, would already be such a huge help in this, where we can slowly develop to a really authority someone maybe. But I would wish already that would be a huge help.
I just forgot to mention one more thing. For the supervision of the European Union member state police forces, we do have data protection authorities, and on supranational level we do have joint supervisory body for Europol. I was a chair of that body for 3 years, and 3 times a year we performed heavy inspections in Den Haag to supervise what the Europol is basically doing with the huge data filing systems. And Europol are only the guys sitting behind computers. This is not a field police. So why do we have a strong joint supervisory body to inspect Europol, and we have nothing for intelligence agencies? Nada, niente.
Get Polly, can we do anything to at least make the gap between the possibilities that European police, intelligence and companies, firms, providers and so on have, and for example the NSA has? Do we need more money, more education? Do we have to pay good hackers like the NSA is doing? Do you have any idea?
The first problem, I think, that to answer this question is always in a national content. It looks in Austria very different to Germany or Great Britain or France. It is not only a question of money and resources, it's a question of political will, to say so. Regarding the gap, I do not see much that this gap will be closed very next time soon. Because the technology, the advanced status of US and NSA in this case is so huge that we even nowadays do not understand how they steal their data. This is just ironically. And let me conclude, I'm not so much worried about secret services because outsiders think the potential is huge. I know the deficits by heart in daily working and in cooperation. The only thing which worries me is that we do not have in most of the intelligence services the capacity and the money to protect their own data, for as Snowden perfect demonstrates. It's not only a technical question, it's also a question of the weakest point in this system is always a human being, as Snowden shows. So if there is any danger in data protection, you may excuse me, is the ability to steal this data from the services. Why do we not hear much of this? Because nobody is interested to put this in public first, as companies do, same thing. And the other thing is, nobody cares about the data of intelligence services because they are not that much usable for to make money out of it. If you follow the recent developments of hackers, they avoid secret services because there's nothing to steal, which is of really worth, because they do not have political strategies. They just have the credit card numbers and other personal information they can use in the internet for that. What are you going to do with information, personal information from services? You can blackmail someone. This is not a big business. Well, you would be disappointed what quality the information of service, what quality of information the services do have. We had this huge discussion in Austria about Vorratsdatenspeicherung. I don't know the English data retention, you know. And for so many years, we find out it's basically worthless because they were arguing years ago, we need this to counter terrorist attacks. Of course, this was always a philosophy, and the European governments were obeying very much to that. Then after years, we find out it's not. There are only a couple of cases where it's using this instrument for exactly that. Now it has changed again. And I would like to have a minute to demonstrate what the problem is. Now we are facing the situation that hundreds of young European, or not so young European citizens, are going to Iraq and to Syria to join IS. And there is a lot of pressure on national services here in Austria to take charge, to take control of this development. Ironically enough, you know, they have only the possibilities not even to go 6 months back, and even in electronic traces. And even this we are going to erase. So we are fighting today a war, a control war against our own authorities in a certain way. But this is only national driven. But other big services do not have this problem. They have this data anyhow. What do you think how this data will come to Austria or to Germany? They are coming to Austria and Germany by US sources or other sources in the region who find out that there is an Austrian telephone number there showing up in a very strange environment. And then they contact Austria and the investigation here starts. But they cannot do much because they are gone. The network is not to be detected. And the legal constrictions, that way, they are unable to understand the network. So you see, there is another dimension of data protection as well. And we have to balance that in a certain way. And I'm very happy being here to understand your approach, and I do understand the approach of the security authorities. And I think it's highly on time to put these two approaches in a realistic approach together.
Thank you very much. I think the term balance is really, really good as a closing remark for this panel. I think you, the audience, have got some ideas, some orders, so to say, what to do next. Everybody in his or her field. Maybe you have some ideas, or you can talk to our panelists. I thank the panelists very, very much for their inputs. Natascha Pietz-Musa, Gerd René Polly, Mario Oetheimer and Christoph Scholl, and I hand the stage over to Andreas Krisch, and he's talking about Datenschutz, Rechtsdurchsetzung. Thank you very much.